With that, I'll just welcome some panelists. So we'll bring back Neil. I don't know if you need an introduction again, but it's Neil. Let's give a hand to Neil again. Our next panelist is Nate Wallace. He leads the Environmental Defense's work on decarbonizing the transportation sector. He's a member of Transport Canada's Zero Emission Vehicle Council. Nate has been a frequent contributor to infrastructure-related chapters of the annually published alternative federal budget, which is, we did the municipal version of that, but we were inspired by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives alternative federal budget, again coordinated by the CCPA. His commentary on public policy issues has also been published in the Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, National Observer, and the Hill Times. Before joining Environmental Defense, Nate was a policy advisor at the Canadian Urban Transit Association, or CUDA. Let's give a round of applause to Nate. And now we'll welcome Farhang. Farnaz is a researcher at Vivic Research. In her work, Farnaz takes a critical research approach that focuses on identifying the underlying structures that perpetuate social injustice and harm. Previously, Farnaz worked as a project manager and research coordinator for community-based research initiatives. Her research is focused on marginalized youth perspectives, on mental health and substance use. She believes that research is most effective when the communities impacted by its outcomes are able to guide and participate in the process. Farnaz holds a graduate degree in criminology. Her dedication to social justice and community-based research is reflected in her work at Vivic Research. And also, Farnaz was involved in this year's alternative budget and has been involved since we started in 2020. So has been involved since the very start, even before she was with Vivic Research. So let's give Farnaz a round of applause. So yeah, thanks for joining us tonight. And I guess like the first thing that I want to sort of get out of the way, and Neil, I guess you kind of gave your initial observations on the budget, but there was a lot in there that I'll let you talk more about it, but a lot in there that we were expecting. A lot of cuts, some that were worse, some weren't as bad. For example, there was for the seniors monthly pass, it was 120% increase. So it went from $49 to $108 per month for seniors. So there were some cuts like that, raising transit fares by 5%. Transit was hard hit. There was only, only $30 million for the 100 nonprofit organizations that get, funding pot for the city. 100 nonprofit organizations have to share $30 million. So a lot of stuff like that in the budget. I guess if maybe there's something positive to draw from it if you want to talk about it. But I just want to get your first impression. I guess we'll go with Nate first.
Thanks a lot, Sam. I wanted to mention that because it was actually pretty hidden in the budget. It wasn't in the budget press release. The mayor didn't talk about it this morning. Didn't really come up at council as far as I saw. But CTV broke it later in the day, where not only do we have a 5% fare increase, free transit for 11 and 12-year-olds, that's scrapped, that's gone. The youth transit pass, so for those, the discounted fares for people who between the ages of 13 and 19, that's gone. Seniors' fares are going up by 120% this year. It's a whole lot. It's a whole lot of a really big, significant increase. And of course, I think Neil and I were just looking at the budget documents a few seconds ago. I think they were expecting like $60 extra million for fares this year because of some of these increases. It's really that was, I think, the most depressing part of the budget is seeing that, because I come from a climate perspective, and just actually a few weeks ago, the federal accountability officer for climate basically said, hey, look, we're trying to achieve a 40 to 45% emissions reductions across Canada by 2030, so about 5 years from now. We're only at about 7% decline below 2005 levels. So we have a really, really long way to go in 5 years. And this budget signals just another year where instead of making progress, we're actually falling further and further behind, where we're making transit less affordable, less accessible, and less of an option for people, and forcing them to continue to drive, which will obviously increase our carbon emissions.
And if folks could just try to, I know some folks in the back have a hard time hearing, so we can put the mic maybe close to your mouth, or project a bit more, not that you're bad at anything.
Okay, thank you for your thoughts. I guess I focus more just based on the work I do around the community and social services, the police budget. Sorry, police budget, and then the community social services. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. So I guess initial thoughts. The buzzword of affordability kept being used, and I was a bit confused about like what that actually looks like and like what material change that actually means for the people of Ottawa. So there was like 450 new affordable units being created. And that's always really confusing, like the work me and my colleagues do at Vivic, we always unpack what affordable means, because one definition I think is 30% of the market rent, and that means nothing to someone who's not going to be able to actually pay that price. And they always use like these words of crises, which makes it feel like it's like an issue that's really out of our control. We can't really stop it, we can't really do anything about it. But really it's like, well, we actually don't have a social housing stock that is adequate enough for the people who need it. The work I do that is more like supporting folks navigating the different services, there's huge waiting lists for housing. So they can build and build and build, but if it isn't actually meeting that like not-for-profit social housing stock need, then I don't know what it's for, really. So that's one takeaway. Another was the way that the different budgets were discussed. So when the police presented their budget, the councillors' feedback, the ones that did give feedback, were very, are you sure that's gonna be adequate for what you need? Like very willing to like set the foundations to say, hey, if you need more, don't worry, we got you. Whereas other people, it's like, I think Sam, you said 100+ organizations have to split $30 million. And I think the mayor framed it as like, they're the organization tackling poverty. So how is it that like the police can get a $16 million top up, no big deal, but the rest of the 100 orgs have to split $30 million between them, and that has to cover their salaries, that has to cover just their operating costs, and then they're also supposed to fix poverty. Anyways, those are takeaways, but I'm sure we'll discuss more.
Well, listen, just one thing to add to what I was saying earlier is one of the real takeaways is around the lack of transparency. So even that number of the 30 million for social services, what I haven't had the chance to figure out yet, is that all new money, or is that just incremental above what they were providing last year? You know, is it just, and this is where the city, really doesn't, tries to always use the biggest number and the, and what makes it look good. But really, in terms of how much additional support we're providing is something that we need to dig into to figure out. And just the difficulty for anyone to figure out these things is probably insurmountable.
So I think, Neil, you spoke about transparency. I think it segues well into a next question I had that I just added to this document to beforehand. But I was talking with someone else about it. But I think there are many dynamics at play during the budget process, and who has power and who doesn't, right? Like I think it's clear that in many respects that the people don't really at least have advance notice of really what's put forward, right? We're given a document less than a month before, a 300-page document, and be like, okay, here you go. Let's try to make some changes, right? And then very little, as you noted in your presentation, is actually changed. So I guess I wanted to ask folks about that, like, what kind of dynamics are, like, what power dynamics at play? Like, who are the players who really do get what they want? And I guess this sort of relates to the final, like, and how do we, try to fight back against that? I guess some of that is like reforming the process and other stuff. So yeah, let's talk. So what are the dynamics at play? Who are the players? Who are the people there at City Hall who really sort of, move things behind the scenes? And how do you think we can sort of fight back against that influence? I guess I could start with Neil and then go back.
I mean, in terms of the power dynamics, I think it's largely the the mayor's office that directs and controls what gets funded. And on the operating side, a lot of it is just exactly what we did last year, plus an extra 2.9%. So that's how a lot of the operating budget works. And then on the capital side, I think there's, we've got this massive list of projects that the city wants to do at some point in the future. And the question becomes what gets funded this year and what doesn't, right? And I think that's where it becomes a very black box. And I'm sure there's a lot of horse trading that goes on in terms of people, being able to get their pet projects greenlit. So it's a very murky process. What's clear is that for citizens to be more involved, it would have to start much earlier. And this was one of the comments today around the council table, that could we start this process in February? And I think that's what we really need to push for. But it has to come from a place at City Hall where they actually want to hear what the public has to say.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I think every, whenever they present the budget, there's always the council consultations. And every time I go to them, it just seems like it's like a checkbox. Let's get these wards together, let's present the budget. People can ask some questions, maybe share some grievances, but like nothing they say is actually gonna meaningfully change what that budget looks like. And then it's like the same comments over and over again, like different concerns, but the same comments over and over. So it's clear that none of that is even being taken into consideration for the following year. So yes, if they started earlier, then people can get there earlier. Again, I'll focus my comments on the police budget, but they've also tried to limit, I guess, participation, and that has also limited transparency on how that budget gets decided, how the police board is making decisions about the police budget. I think one example that is positive, I think we included it in the document that went out this round, but people keep forgetting that after a lot of advocacy at the Police Services Board in 2021, so for their 2022 budget, we were able to get a reduction in the budget ask that they had. So they asked for a certain amount, and I think about 2.65 million was able to get diverted back from their budget ask to the city, and then it went towards funding certain mental health organizations that served youth in the city, and then it also created the Mental Health Guiding Council. I won't get into the critiques about that, but I have some. You can talk to me later. But it did go towards doing something else, and they never talk about that. Like, they glaze over it. And what I've noticed in terms of power is, like, even at the consults of different wards, I think Cyril is the staff for the city, but when he presents the budget, he's like, and we will not talk about the police board or the budget because that's not the space for it. But it's like, no, it is, because they're all related. Like, if we're able to divert some resources here to actually go fund new things or like new services, why shouldn't we do that? So yeah, I think they hold a lot of power. I think they also intimidate a lot of the sector, like a lot of these social services that are hoping to have okay relationships with them because they don't want to be isolated within like a political culture that maybe won't fund them next year. So I think that's also a way that there's like a power imbalance, but yeah.
I'll build on this theme of lack of accountability and non-transparency by saying that one of the big issues that civil society has when it comes to keeping local government accountable, especially here in Ottawa, is that we have to deal with a lot of what I would call BS metrics, right? Things that are like on-time reliability for buses, right? We all know that the bus often doesn't come on time, but then when they'll publish their statistics at the end of the year, the OC Transport will claim, I think we achieved our target of 95% or so, I can't remember the number specifically, on-time reliability, and they pat themselves in the back, and everyone goes about their day, and nobody actually like, it's like most of the decision makers in this city don't actually ride the bus. And then you actually dig into it a little bit and it's like, oh wait, so if the bus is 5 minutes late, that actually counts as on time? That's the actual benchmark? And then, you know, so we have to deal with all sorts of these kinds of BS metrics that you kind of really need to start digging a little bit before the truth actually comes out. And that's part of what it makes it so difficult to hold government accountable, is because they will just essentially invent things. They'll make everything seem like it's fine when it's not. It's a bit depressing, but I'll pass it back to Sam.
No, just to build on that, I do remember that for a long time, obviously, at Transit Commission, we were basing metrics off ridership level, obviously, because that's the obvious stat to base it off of. And then randomly, when the new GM came in, we started basing it off of that reliability level, which is at 99.5% or something. Because our ridership level is obviously not that good, so they wanted another benchmark. So actually, you're doing your job pretty well. And this also to Farnaz's point, I mean, with the police, but I remember that when the time when that happened, we were able to mobilize to get over 100 people to go speak at the Police Services Board in 2020, and we were able to push for that. And you know what? When people obviously often say, well, if it was affected, they would outlaw it or make it illegal. And in fact, we were so effective at mobilizing the Police Services Board that they have actually clamped down on public dissent. So if you think your voice doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter to go to a consultation or a budget meeting, it can make a difference in many respects. But yeah, I think this is an important question here, because you know we've heard a lot about funding from other levels of government. That has been a key theme in this budget process and in previous budget, the campaign for fairness that Sutcliffe keeps talking about. You know, what responsibility do you think the province and federal government has when it comes to city funding versus the city's own responsibility? So let's start with Farnaz.
Okay, one thing that comes to mind, like right this moment, is the sprung structure. The whole debate, I don't know if people are following that, but that I've been thinking about a lot, because it feels like the city is trying to navigate an issue that is created because other levels of government either didn't plan adequately or didn't fund resources adequately. So I think in those regards, like there's certain big structural problems that all levels need to be working together in order to actually tackle it. With that said, I don't think that it's one of those things where like if they fail to tackle it, that one level should blame another. Like I think it actually just shows that they just need to collaborate better so that the issue's solved, rather than saying like, this is not my problem, you did something wrong. So I don't know, like that is what's coming to mind. So like, right now the whole debate, if people aren't familiar with it, is there's like some people are resisting against the creation of sprung structures, which are to have a safe place for newcomers to be at, because right now they're in recreational facilities and that's not sustainable because those need to be used for other things. And so we do need a space for people to be able to exist in while they figure out the long-term solutions that all levels have been lacking on. And so like that is one where I guess working on something like the alt budget, it just shows how disorganized and discoordinated all the levels are at tackling issues. And maybe that's on purpose, I don't know. But all I know is it doesn't have good outcomes for people. Again, I'll also plug in another police comment, but it's, we have like if you heard about Ottawa getting a new helicopter, for like the police got a new helicopter, that was a gift from the province. We could be doing so much more with that money, but it just also, it's like we need to keep other levels of government accountable for what they're also funding in our cities and like what they're creating capacity for. And in that case, that's not really a capacity for anything good, but we'll go.
Unambiguously, cities are getting the raw end of the deal here. When it comes to taxation, cities are getting, like, are way underfunded compared to what they need to be. So for every tax dollar that's collected, 11 cents of that goes to the city, to cities. Through transfers, cities end up spending about 15 cents, but I think the number should probably be closer to 25%, 20 to 20 cents on the dollar. Just in terms of what we ask cities to do, and as we've seen, when higher levels of government decide they just don't want to do something, it's the cities that feel the consequence, right? The cities that have to pick up the slack and figure out how to make it work. So yeah, there is a fiscal imbalance federally, no doubt about it. And there's no easy fix to it. But one thing's for sure is that it doesn't make a lot of sense for one city to stand up on its own and say, I'm getting a raw deal. This is where, with the example of the Police Services Board, where a lot of people got together and acted with a common voice, that's what we need cities to do too. Have all cities stand up and say, we need a better deal, and more from provinces and also from the federal government.
I love this question. So I've written for the past 3 or 4 years the alternative federal budget for CCPA, the transit chapter, the Cities and Infrastructure Grant and Transit chapter, and it's absolutely clear that in my view that the federal government should have a much bigger role when it comes to funding transit. For the longest time, we were the only G7 country without a national transit strategy. That sort of changed in 2016 when the federal government got involved with capital funding. So they'll spend all this money to build new LRT projects in cities across the country, but then they'll sort of dine and dash when it comes to, after cutting the ribbon, and sort of leave cities on the hook for paying for operations that they can't really afford because they don't have access to revenue tools like income sales or gasoline taxes that cities, like the cities around the world that have the best transit, all have access to these kinds of revenue tools that cities in Canada don't have. Provinces as well, like in Ontario, we're still living in the post-Mike Harris era when it comes to transit funding, where before Mike Harris, the province of Ontario funded about half of transit operating costs in cities across the country. Then he dismantled that program, and then we kind of went into a huge downward spiral of transit systems all across Ontario throughout the 90s. And then about in 2005, the province started giving about 2 cents of gasoline tax revenues back to cities for transit, which is sort of like a drop in the bucket. And then it was going to increase to 4 cents, and then that was canceled by Doug Ford. So there is actually big problems when it comes to funding transit, both at the federal and municipal level, but that doesn't mean that lets the city of Ottawa off the hook for funding it itself. I just look at, for example, City of Toronto. Mayor Chow negotiated this year the new deal for the city with the provincial government. She got $630 million in transit operations funding over 3 years out of Doug Ford, right? And then Mayor Sutcliffe also negotiated a new deal for Ottawa at this right around the same time, and we got highway money and police helicopters. So and then after that, he started his whole "In Fairness for Ottawa" campaign. And it's like, where was this when you were negotiating this deal with the province? Like when you were negotiating, you would have actually known the deficit problems that's been going on since the pandemic. Where was this then? Why are you, you should be sending a very strongly worded letter to yourself for your poor negotiation skills. So it's very frustrating to see as a transit advocate, and as someone who's been campaigning on actually having higher orders of government fund transit for years now. The worst argument you can use is the one that the City of Ottawa is using, and it's rather than, we're doing our part by raising property taxes and investing in transit, we need your help to actually deliver on these sorts of expansion plans that will actually benefit our residents, and you can be rewarded politically, and there's lots of good arguments you can use to convince higher levels of government. First, you need to actually have your own skin in the game. But what doesn't convince higher orders of government is say, hey, give us a free lunch so I can pay for my tax cuts, right? That doesn't work. And that's what the city of Ottawa has been doing, and we've gotten the results, which is $0.
Thanks, Nate, for that. Very cathartic response, I think, for everyone in the room. Well, for me at least. So I think there's about 15 minutes left of the panel, so I think I'm gonna ask one more question, then we're gonna go to a bit of a Q&A for whatever you have time for. I have a couple of questions here I'm gonna try to ask. I guess one helpful thing from you folks would be, I mean, we're here because we want to advocate for building a better budget, right? So I'll kind of try to meld this question into two. One is obviously I think if you could give some folks advice, if they want to speak at some committees coming up, Transit Commission or Community Services Committee, etc. What would you give them? And then in that, I think a good rhetorical sort of advice too is maybe you could meld in that what is the cost of not raising property taxes? So I think we talk a lot about it's going to cost the taxpayer this and that, but we don't talk about what the cost of not raising it is, right? And I think we're stuck in this. There's a myth about that we can have low taxes and good services at the same time, which isn't true. So I guess if that makes sense, if you can answer both of those questions. Sure.
So in terms of the cost of low property taxes is we bake in austerity, right? Because I think I was just running some numbers before I came here about how much inflation's gone up since before the pandemic, about 18% in the overall price level, and property taxes about 14%. So we're already starting off with a shrunken ability to pay for just the day-to-day services we rely on. So things steadily get worse and worse. And I think we've seen that with our transit system. And this is something we don't actually publish in the budget because then people would hold them accountable. But if you look at external, all transit agencies report their numbers to CUDA, the Transit Association, which tracks the stats for all the transit agencies in the country. I'm very familiar with it, I used to work there. But if you look at those numbers, there's something called revenue vehicle service hours per capita. And that's a really nerdy way of describing sort of what is the average amount of service per person in a city, transit service. You measure it in vehicle service hours per person. And that number in about 2018 was about 2.7, and now it's declined to about 2.1 to 2.2. And that's just transit service across per person in the city of Ottawa. Population's been growing, the transit system has been shrinking at the same time. So if you feel like since 2018, in particular, that transit service has gotten significantly worse in the city, I think over about 20% decline in service per person, you're absolutely right. And essentially what we did in the last budget is we recognized, okay, our ridership is about 80% of pre-pandemic levels. It's not really recovering as fast as we thought. Let's lock that in. Let's sell off over 100 buses. Let's shrink the size of our fleet and just lock in a shrunken system for good, which is what they did in the last budget. And now we're sort of living with that. And I think part of that, of course, is the fact that we've been keeping property taxes below the rate of inflation. So.
What about what people can advocate or do to advocate? That was part of the question.
Oh, what can people do? Oh, geez. Vote.
Okay, I won't bring the numbers. I think Nate brought numbers. I'll say the ultimate cost is, I guess, community suffering, and then that will impact everybody regardless of where you find yourself in the spectrum of privilege out there. If people in your community are not doing well, we will all pay for it somehow. I guess in terms of what to do, let's not end things on a grim note. In terms of what to do, I think pick issues that matter most to you and you're most interested in that will help you have a sustained interest in keeping up to date with what's going on, because it is labor intensive to be following all of this. And people have work, they have other commitments and responsibilities. It's really hard to follow everything. But if everybody has like something that they care about, and then you get together, and I think that was what the coalition did a lot of, is like people are working on different issues. One person can be really focused on this and then bring that information to the broader coalition. It can help inform people and like be like, hey, did you see this? Like, this is also what the city's doing, and we should push back against it. And then whether it's signing up to delegate at one of the committees that is related to the cause that you care about. The police board, I don't know if it was mentioned, I know you had a list of all of the committees and where people can talk, but the police board, Robin Brown is a better person to know when it is gonna be. He's here, so you can chat with him. But it is a bit harder to delegate at that one now because of the bylaw that they passed. You have to have your full delegation written out about a week before, and then they kind of edit it, so you can't say certain things. They copy edit it for you, but no other committee does that. And so, but yeah, just pick whatever issue that you care about and then go to it. Reach out to the groups who are already doing the work, because maybe they can catch you up faster than if you were gonna read through those 300 pages of budgets yourself. And also doing that connects you with people who are also interested and care about the issues that you also care about, and it feels less lonely, less overwhelming, you burn out less, yeah.
When people see budgets, when they're presented, they're often cloaked in this complexity where a lot of people feel, oh, I can't understand this, or I don't. There must be something going on here that that doesn't make me capable of commenting. That is all BS. Okay, everyone should be able to understand budgets just the way you can understand your household budget. And I think that what we need to do to answer the question about advocacy, what I would love is for as many of us as possible to show up at the finance committee because the mayor is there, and say, we want a better budget. We want our voice to be heard in the budget. And to do that, you need to start in February, okay? And you know what works? Simple messages repeated often. Simple messages repeated often. So if I think a number of us come into the finance committee, which is I think December 3rd, I had it up on the screen, and come in and say, listen, the budget's happening. We just want to improve the budget process for next year. We think that the citizens of Ottawa, the residents of Ottawa, deserve a voice and deserve to be heard. So we want to start that process in February, and we want it to be meaningful. Because right now it's not meaningful. I think everyone involved sees that and understands that. So go into the finance committee with a very simple message of let's start this process in February and let's make it meaningful. And I think if the mayor hears that from enough people, he will find it hard not to act on it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Neil. I think everyone, you shouldn't feel intimidated to get involved in the process. And as a quote that I repeat this quote often, it's not an original thought. I don't remember where I heard it, but I really like it, and I say it often at these types of events, that you're an expert in on your community because you live in it every day. So I think that everyone should take that to heart, and you could fight for anything in your neighborhood, because you experience it all the time. So I think with that, and Nick, how much time do you have? Like 10 minutes? Yeah. Okay, so we'll try and take like two or three questions. I apologize for time.
Okay, so that's 3.
Oh, there you go. So we'll start. I guess we'll start. We'll start in the back, I think, and we'll move because I just feel bad for you folks in the back. Who was the person? Oh, Sharon. Could you folks hear Sharon?
Yeah.
Okay.
This hasn't been mentioned, but the thing that bothers me about the budget is the capital expenditure on Lansdowne 2.0 and Hayward. Like Lansdowne 2.0 is a $500 million project that's going to be paid for by residents over 40 years. And they say they're going to get the annual payment down to $5 million, but that's by having some questionable offsets. And meanwhile, they're tearing down the existing sports facilities and replacing them with sports facilities that are smaller than what we need. So, like, that whole thing is insane. And I don't think we should, the the city should be spending, you know, taxpayer, $500 million of taxpayers' money, and it's gonna be more when they're finished, on that project.
Okay, so there's a question on Lansdowne 2.0 and Taywin, so we'll take that. Who's the other hand that was so two hands up here? Derek, and then you.
Yeah. Derek Simpson, Centertown Community Association. My question is for Nate. What do you predict happening if we don't get federal or provincial funding for transit?
Good question. Don't make people too critical.
You talked about maintenance gaps and shortfalls. Two related questions. How much would taxes and fees need to increase each year to pay that gap, that shortfall, within the next 10 years, say? And how does the city going to be encouraging areas that currently contribute more in taxes than they receive in the cost to serve them?
Can you summarize that question? We couldn't hear that.
Do you want to just repeat it really quickly?
So how much would fees and taxes need to increase to pay off the maintenance shortfall or gap? And what does the city need to do to encourage areas that currently pay more in taxes and fees than it costs to provide them services?
Good. I see one more question all the way in the back. Well, you folks you remember some of the, great. Well, I remember some, so we'll go to the back here. Okay. Great, thank you. That's pretty, how do we make people care? We got that one. We can start with that one, yeah, and then we'll just take those four, just because we don't have that much time, so we'll start with that question, and if you want to.
Yeah. So that is a great question. How do we make people care? And I've been thinking a lot about that, and the conclusion I've come to is make it about money. And that's why I keep saying with transit, you know, if we're spending $500 million a year on transit, don't we want to spend maybe a little bit more and make it work? I think that the idea of wasting money is something that most taxpayers would find really reprehensible. So that's, I mean, we have to figure out what works, but that's the way I would approach, or that's the way I am approaching that question. On infrastructure, the infrastructure deficit, so we don't know how much it is yet. And we will get that information in the first half of next year. And really it's up to the city to tell us how they're going to fill that gap. I mean, it really shouldn't be up to us to tell the city how to do that. But it's one of these situations where it's such a big number that you almost can't process it, right? And it's just like, oh, well, let's just forget about that.
Yeah, so I guess I'll wrap up how to make people care into this as well. But I guess just the immediate amount is about 36 million that they've set aside as Fed Prov, which I don't know, based on current trends, probably won't happen. So is that a political move to set up sort of deflecting blame to other levels of government if they eventually just use that to cut service? I don't know. That might be something we find out in the future. I think so obviously that's one thing. That could be wiped out, I think, with the 2% increase in property taxes, or even like a 1.6% increase in property taxes. So, and as Neil was saying, like other cities around the country are all increasing property taxes like 8 to 12%. So, and we're doing half of that. So like even if we got to even 2/3 of what other cities are doing this year, we could wipe out that deficit. I think the next question is actually that's just to get ourselves out of the deficit hole. What is it going to do to actually start restoring service levels to where they were even just before the pandemic? And even on top of that, what it would take to invest in transit to make it such a reliable option that we actually create a shift for people out of their cars to reduce carbon emissions and actually meet our climate goals. That's something that's a whole other level of thing that we need to actually do. It's going to take a lot more than 36 million, which I think actually the federal and provincial governments really do need to come in on that side of things, is to really juice service growth and affordability so we can actually get those ridership growth numbers. And how to make people care. I think Neil was right about making it about money. I think in Vancouver, they recently, I know a lot of the transit campaigners out there, and they actually recently passed a motion at City Council to implement bus lanes, and they converted all these sort of more right-leaning councillors by making the argument that they actually calculated how much congestion costs for the operating budget of the transit system, because when a bus driver is sitting in traffic or behind a red light, you're paying them that time to not pick up and drop off passengers, which actually ultimately makes the whole system a lot less efficient, end up costing them something like $30 to $50 million per year just in the cost of congestion of not having bus lanes. So they found the number and they used it to flip all these councillors to actually voting for it. I think that was a really useful, I think we should actually start looking at what that cost of congestion for transit is here in Ottawa. But I think, not just the numbers, but also how to make people care is talking to them. I think the vast majority of people are completely tuned out of the political process. They would care deeply about these issues if they actually knew they existed, right? I think a lot of people are really tuned out, and it's up to us, people who are paying attention, to talk to them. And having door-to-door conversations, canvassing, is actually the most effective way to actually get people to plug in and care about this stuff. So volunteer with Horizon Ottawa.
I like that, that's good.
Okay, just being mindful that there was a question on Lansdowne. I don't have a perfect answer, but maybe Neil does. Hold on. Okay, you go on.
Sharon, the one thing about Lansdowne and Taywin is that neither of them actually hit the 2025 budget. That's why they're not showing up. That's why they're not being talked about. But they're ticking time bombs, both of them, right? And with Lansdowne, it's they're both particularly egregious, but with Lansdowne, the decision is coming to council later in 2025. Like the end of 2025 is when they're set to make that final decision on Lansdowne.
But they made some interim decisions and they're already spending money.
Right. Well, they're spending sort of marginal amounts of money, right? $10 million here, that sort of stuff, right? Which is a lot of money, but compared to the big scheme here, it's fairly modest. I think we just need to keep the pressure on with regards to Lansdowne, and Taywin is another issue that we can talk about, but it's part of it is with Lansdowne is, as you allude to, there's a lot of disinformation and there's a narrative being pitched by the city that is probably not, well, it's probably in a lot, it never made sense, but it makes less sense now. And we just have to figure out what the entry point is to be able to raise that and to have council see just what a mistake this is, particularly given all the discussions we're having about not having money for anything else.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'll wrap up, and I think the only question I'm qualified to answer is how to make people care. I think the fiscal route is one route, and I think it works for some people, especially if that's their focus and those arguments make sense to them. But there's also another group of people that knows that what we're doing sometimes isn't fiscally responsible, and also there's a cost of human life to it. So funneling money into the shelter system, knowing it's like a really, really bad Band-Aid solution instead of investing in like social housing stock, people know that that costs more in a lot of ways. But it's also an industry. There's some people who are making money out of that industry as well. So I do think like just fiscal arguments themselves don't work on everybody. So getting to know the issue that you care about, the ins and outs of it, the narratives that the government uses to push forward whatever they're trying to do, and then knowing how to counter that, I think is important. We have like, I organize with different groups, but again, it's gonna be around like community safety issues. But like a lot of the times taking the narrative back around that about how like police are not gonna be the solution to intimate partner violence. They're not gonna be the solution to sexual assault, even if they keep using those issues as like we are prioritizing these things, please give us more money to hire more police. They aren't the solution, and if you talk to the people both working in the sector, but also the people experiencing these types of safety concerns, they will also tell you that. And there's a lot of jargon around, as I think the person who asked the question said, there is a lot of jargon, so I think it's also about working to make these narratives and laying out the issue in an accessible way so that people can be like, yeah, okay, I get that, and then come with you instead of like bombarding them with things that they won't understand, get overwhelmed, and then hold on to the very like easy responses. And I think that's what we do a lot of. I think people's knee-jerk reaction is police are there for public safety, and we hear it over and over again, but then no one really challenges that in an effective way, or the people who try to are then like isolated or seen as like too radical to be part of that discussion. But yeah, I'm happy to discuss that further as we network, I guess.
Yeah, just to wrap it up, I think connecting it to everyday issues too, right? Because people might not care about the city budget, but they care about if they can get out to work on time. They care about if they're safe, walking the street, etc. And also on Nate's door knocking comment, just a bit of a funny story. It's a bit silly, but I was knocking on doors one time on a municipal campaign, and I spoke to someone about public transit, about fighting back against transit cuts, and they were like, "Well, I don't take transit, so I don't really care." I was like, "But other people do," and they were like, "Oh yeah." So like it's silly. It is still a silly story, but like people sometimes they don't really think about things unless you really go out and talk to them. So I think it's also a good point. So I just want to, before we pass it off to Nick to explain the rest of the evening, let's give a hand to our panelists, Neil, Farhang, and Nate. Thanks so much.